to the audience. Hello, hola everyone. We are back with more adventures, more interviews, and more awesome people to talk to here at Agile and DevOps West 2023 in Vegas. I have here with me our amigo Christopher Harrison, Deborah with GitHub. So we were super excited to have him here. He even brought some props to have our little
Little
octopus
plush
cat
pony,
and
Mona.
plush joining us in the conversation. Christopher, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
I'm super excited. And first of all, I just want to dive into topics, but for the people that do not know you, do you mind sharing what you're doing? What is your role, or what are your whereabouts nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in DevRel, developer relations, as an advocate at GitHub. And so basically my role is to help organizations, help individuals get up and running with GitHub, help improve their DevOps processes, things like that.
In general, enabling people.
Exactly. Yeah. And really trying to have a two-way conversation. So like trying to help people get up and running, but also then in turn, like listening to the problems that people are having with what they're trying to do with their own work, or the problems that they're having with maybe our products, and, trying to figure out how it is that we can better meet everybody's needs.
And now that you get into those problems, troubles, what are common problems that people come and ask you or need help with that you could like already share, spread even wider messages?
Yeah, absolutely. So, gosh, it's such a broad question. There's a lot there. So, probably one of the biggest things that I wind up getting asked, especially because of what I do. So my primary focus is around developer experience. So like the couple of big GitHub products that I focus in on is GitHub Codespaces and GitHub Copilot. So a lot of it is questions around like, okay, well, like what problems does it solve, and things like that. So when it comes to like Codespaces, which is the ability to spin up a container in the cloud and connect to that with your IDE, is being able to, very quickly get that entire environment set up, which can often take like hours or maybe even days for a developer to get set up and start actually contributing to a project. And then GitHub Copilot, which is generative AI and can help make code suggestions and really just help developers be more productive by, suggesting the next line or the next block or like even the next entire function or class of the code that they're creating. So just like how to get the most out of those and how to get started there.
It sounds like a lot of the situations are around the get started steps, like getting into it, and I can totally relate. It's a beautiful set of tools, tasks, abilities that you can do there, but I have to admit, from my perspective, can be overwhelming.
Yes.
And do you have any like situations like that?
Yeah, quite a bit, and it's one of the mistakes that I think all of us wind up making, just like as humans, is we make this assumption that if I understand how to do it, or if it's easy for me, then it must be easy and intuitive for everybody else, and everybody else understands that. And that's of course not the case. And so unfortunately, when it comes to different products, that we just we assume, oh, everybody's going to be able to figure that out. And that's not always the case. So kind of making sure that we are getting that message out there and really trying to listen and help people get up and running. And like, that's of course not unique to GitHub. That I think every organization under the sun kind of struggles with that, is just like getting that 101 content out there, getting that like, hey, here's the getting started part of that.
You're a particular case for each person, because I'm going to share a little bit on mine. I was used a little bit about working with repositories, like standard things. But when I got to GitHub, and because of my work and where we are, was like, how many stars do you have? How many releases? How many things? I'm like, stars? What? Where in Git are stars? Like some of the... And it's something amazing for me that GitHub gave this opportunity to turn it into like a social network for code sharing and working together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of those options, which ones are the ones that you think are more appreciated or more impactful for people that start playing with GitHub in general and the communities? There's so much
Boy,
to choose,
yeah,
right?
no, that's such a great question. And I think I think it's something you really have to take a holistic approach to when it comes to looking at all of that. So it isn't just simply like, hey, here's the number of commits that I have, and like here's that cool little green chart. And don't get me wrong, like I love seeing that green chart, but that doesn't always tell the full story because maybe you took a vacation, and so now you have 2 weeks where you didn't commit anything, but you were taking care of your mental health, and like that's of course like very very important. So that doesn't always tell the whole story. And like you mentioned the number of stars, the number of follows, the number of forks that you can have, and again, like each of those individually doesn't necessarily tell the full story either. So I think it is a little bit more of a holistic approach, that you sort of have to look at everything and really see like what's the engagement that you're seeing, what's the contributions that you're making, how it is that you're connecting with everybody. So I know that's a little bit like hand wavy, but I think that really is it, that there isn't like one specific measure that I think you can look at. You really have to take a holistic approach to it and kind of look at everything.
You mentioned the green bars of your commits and the time lapse that where you have been doing them. You just made me think like when you are like keeping up with it and doing a bunch per day, and as you very well said, going on vacation, just reminded me there was this mobile device video game that I was just uh, uh, not addicted, but they had this element that if you didn't connect again in 24 hours, you lose your stars or whatever you
Oh
want.
yeah, like Farmville was like that. I think that, yeah, if you didn't
It
connect
wasn't
after a little
Farmville.
while, or like Tamagotchi was also like
Ah,
that.
it's gonna die.
If
Your
you're old enough
Tamagotchi is
to
gonna
remember
die. That's a very
Tamagotchi,
good example.
yeah.
And I've never had that anxiety. I've never been very good at my commits and trying to keep up with them. But I can tell someone that is very involved with that, like, oh my god, at the beach, I'm like, oh, checking in something, committing something. It's interesting. It's a double-edged sword now that you mention.
Yeah, and I think that there was, I remember that there was a lot of focus in on that green bar, like making sure that there's constant commits. And fortunately, I think a lot of that has started to subside. That we're taking a much healthier approach to looking at all of that and realizing that, hey, I might go a few days without a commit, or maybe like I'm getting pulled into like project planning, or again like I'm taking a vacation, so I'm not going to be committing for a little while. So let's take a look at the big picture rather than did I get my little green square for that day.
That's a great insight into some situations, because when you mentioned that, I remember a friend that was super happy that created like an automation that did commits automatically and just changing something silly. And I'm like, now I understand why was that. Like, I can go away and this will keep committing and keeping my levels. I'm like, it's certainly like those little details may not be all that important, how many stars or where you are
Right.
on the ratings. It feels like it definitely has a social network component, right?
It does. It does. And, to go kind of one step further with that, I'll often hear about people that are like using GitHub as a little bit of their resume. So
Oh
as like
yeah.
their portfolio. And, I think that, to the example that you mentioned where you have somebody that's like got a script and it's doing that commit. So now we're filling up the green bars. Like, okay, well, that's not meaningful. And so like, if I'm an employer, or if I'm somebody that's really trying to assess, like, what is this developer up to? What is it that they're doing? I want to go kind of that next step. So if they've, forked some different open source repositories and they've made commits there, let me go look at what it is that they're doing there. Let me kind of dig one step further and see what impact that they're actually having, and then use that to start to assess. So rather than, just that, hey, did we get a green box today? It's the bigger picture there.
It's
So
not just a silly metric like, and when you say that, I picture the uh, potential employer. What are those commits happening? Oh,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if it's a whole bunch of individual commits of, added a carriage return, added a semicolon, that's not doing anything. So, take another step down into it and see what's actually going on.
the GitHub world is super interesting. It's growing, and interestingly, I'm guessing as well with Microsoft's maybe like helping it to grow and all the synergies that will happen there. And I don't know what it will happen with it and AI and all the new things coming up. But now I want to jump a little bit on. I mean, I have also the role as a DevRel, and I'm very curious. How did you ended up in DevRel? What was your origin story, or how is it that you ended up here?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's been a long and winding road. So I got my start actually doing tech support for ISPs years and years and
Oh wow!
years ago. And what wound up happening was I because I knew that tech was going to be my career. I knew this is what I wanted to do, and so anytime that there was something new to get in and explore, my answer was always yes. And so at the company that I was at, we were also starting to get calls about Mac OS.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, cool. You know what? I'm going to go learn this. And so all of a sudden, I found myself taking all the Windows calls and all the Mac OS calls. I'm like, hang on a minute, this is now way too much work. And so I put together a little training thing for all my coworkers, and that actually, through a little bit of a longer story, then got me into doing tech training. And so I did tech training for maybe about 15, 16 years,
Oh
something like that.
wow!
Yeah. So training up developers in different professional settings. And then eventually I moved over to Microsoft, did a lot of online content for Microsoft, and then moved on over into DevRel from there. So from that little course that I wound up building at a tech support job for an ISP, that sort of like launched my career. And so I look at myself as being in DevRel, at least to some degree, pretty much since then, because I've had that primary focus of how can I help you? How can I help you solve problems that,
Enable
like,
people.
yeah, like the thing that I loved when I was doing tech training is people having that aha moment, like, you solved my problem. That feeling
Cool.
never gets old. And so moving into DevRel was a very natural transition from that, because of course that's a big part of DevRel, is just helping people figure out answers to their problems.
It is impressive how it is like snowball effect that you started just with that training, and this snowball starts picking up here, 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 more people, more help, and isn't it like I'm not sure if calling it addictive, but it's great to help people, right?
Oh
To
yeah.
enable
Yeah.
them, and thanks to whatever efforts you are doing, see people grow or get places.
Oh yeah.
Any cool stories around that?
One of the first jobs that I had when I was doing technical training was doing what in America is sometimes shortened as voc rehab or vocational rehabilitation, which
What's that? I'm
is,
sorry, no.
yeah, no. So it's basically what will happen is you'll have somebody who's maybe served in the military for a handful of years, and they get out, and then they're going, okay, well, now I want to start a career, but they didn't necessarily pick up the skills that they want to make into their
Mm,
career. And so they'll go off and they'll learn something else. And so in my case, it was, let's teach you networking. And that was my focus at the time. And so I had somebody that went through the program that I was teaching at this particular center, and they came back about like 3 months after they had graduated the program, having gotten that first job. And they came back in and they said, I got that job because of you. And that, like, even like to this day, this was years ago, and to this day, like, I tell that story and I still get goosebumps. Like, it's such an amazing thing to be able to help somebody, to be able to empower somebody like that.
you changed the life, and it's
Yeah.
like that feels the goosebumps, the chills. Are like it is cool in a good way,
Yeah.
but it's like, oh wow, I can't believe it. And
Yeah.
and speaking of those changes and those situations nowadays, like any recent stories that you have been doing, like now that you are with GitHub, like you are helping here, have you gotten any similar stories like that person?
Not Unfortunately, not Not yet, but that will come. And part of like that low level individual story is partly because of the area of focus that I have these days at GitHub, because a lot of what I'm doing is executive briefings and things like that. And so, there isn't necessarily like that individual type of story. But that being said, like the role that I had before this was actually working with college students and helping. Yeah, that I absolutely loved being able to do.
I have had some experiences, and that is like, I mean, and it's tough to say, like they're like kids. I'm like, oh my god, how old am I that I call them kids? Sir, you made me choose this career.
Yeah,
like,
but
oh,
at the same time, I find that so inspiring because like I have a non-traditional background that when I got to college, I was not ready for college. I was not ready to
none of
not
us
have any structure.
and
like I literally flunked out in like under a semester. Like if you're going to do it right, apparently. And so like watching these kids at, 18, 19, 20 be able to do what they're doing, like it's amazing. I'm in awe of them and what it is that they're doing.
It's weird and cool at the same time, because you can become a role model. I'm not sure if I had any, like when you say that, like getting at college, there you're like, I'm here because my parents sent me, but I don't know. I want to party or watch TV, or I don't know. And it's very interesting that you could fulfill that role and becoming like a figure, a role model, or some mentorship, which I don't know. As you say, the goosebumps and the good feels from that.
Yeah.
Addictive or good in a way.
Yeah.
And speaking of, nowadays you are also generating still content, some knowledge transferring. And I know that you have, I knew that you had one talk here, but it results that he has two. Whoa. And the first one, and I remember because in the morning I was reading all the talks, shifting left the right way, and it was silly because in the morning I was like reading like pun intended, like it's I got the joke.
I was kind of proud of that title.
I approve. And that's when I'm like, oh my god, I'm into that jokes now. But that was an awesome one. I really enjoyed it. But can you share what were you? There are two. We're gonna get into the second one in a moment. But a little spoiler or trailer of what is this talk about, or what is the right way for the left shift?
Yeah. So basically, the Cliff Notes version, like the short version of it, is when we think about DevSecOps, when we think about trying to improve the security of the software that we ship, we always hear this phrase of shift left, shift left, shift left, which is trying to move things as close to the developer as possible. But we don't always have then the next part of that conversation, which is, well, what does that look like? And a lot of times when we try that, we wind up making the wrong decisions, or we wind up asking people to do things that aren't necessarily natural to them, aren't necessarily comfortable with for them. So, like as a perfect example, one of the big things that we try to do is let's upskill our developers. Let's make our developers security experts. And we've tried this for years and years and years and years, and it's continued to fail. And the perfect example of this is the fact that SQL injection attacks still exist. Like SQL injection attacks have been around for literally 25, 30 years. Like this is something
every year it's on the top 5 of the list of...
And it shouldn't be, because we have so many frameworks that are out there that can help you with that. And you either would have to like use them the wrong way, or you have to, get down to like the low level to use them. And yet here we are. And it's because, our developers are not security experts. And so they maybe haven't learned that, or haven't learned it in an impactful way. And sometimes it's because we wind up teaching them the wrong way. That as an example of that, I went out and I did an internet search, create a login page using a database as a backend. And the first 3 examples were storing the username and password in clear text. Not even like reversible encryption, not even hashed without salt. No, clear text. And I might not be the world's biggest security authority, but I'm pretty sure storing passwords in clear text is a bad idea. Yeah.
Don't do it. Don't know.
And this is what we're teaching our developers. And so like we keep trying to put all of this onto our developers, and then we're not giving them the tools and the resources that they need, because in a lot of ways we're now asking them to do things that they aren't necessarily comfortable with. And so then what we try to do is, let's go get a security team, and let's put them in charge of securing our software. And there's a host of problems with that, because our security teams are going to be outnumbered, and our security teams are going to have a different set of goals. That our developers want to push features and push software, and our security team wants to minimize that surface area. And so they're doing sometimes two diametrically opposed operations, and so it creates this strong conflict between teams. And then other problems start to arise that my developers are going to start to work around them, because they don't want to be told no, and things like that. And so the whole talk was kind of acknowledging all of that, and then how can we start to resolve that? Like, how can we make sure then that our developers have what they need, that our security teams have what they need?
In like putting in a brief sentence, what is like this golden solution for that, for enabling? I'm curious, actually.
Yeah, and that's actually the big thing, is that there isn't necessarily a single answer to all of that. That
Like
there,
all
yeah,
good questions.
exactly. And so it does wind up being a layered approach. So when it comes to like our developers, is let's make sure that they have the just-in-time information that they need, and maybe that's through like generative AI tools that are helping them write their code, or teaching them kind of higher level concepts. So rather than teaching them like cross-site scripting, like specifically, or teaching them SQL injection specifically, and don't get me wrong, like it's of course important to know all of that, but let's try to teach them why this becomes a thing, and then where it is that we need to be on alert for that. So that way, when they say go to connect to a database, or they go to work with user input, that now like their sensors are going to be up, and now what they can do is now they can reach out to the security team proactively.
Mm-hmm.
And now they can go, hey, I'm about to do this thing. Can you help me out with this? And now we're going to bring our security team closer then to the developers. And then the other very big thing is to have empathy for one another. Like, after all, we are all humans. And I don't think that there's really anybody that's going to go in and do things purposefully wrong. Like they don't necessarily have ill intent. It's just that they're everybody's trying to do their best job, and unfortunately they sometimes wind up doing the wrong thing. And let's figure out why it is that they're doing that, and figure out how we can help them avoid that in the future.
Feeling the importance, because many developers, myself included, until we were bit by those two magical words in a text form: drop database.
Oh, little Bobby tables
in SQL injection, and when I was like,
yeah,
then you look back and like, I have created so much code with that. That's like, that's, I need to go back to the office.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
They are not even aware.
No, and on top of that, like, I mentioned that I was a tech trainer, and one very big thing that like I think every tech trainer under the sun has done at some point is they've uttered the phrase, "Don't do this in production." And it's a terrible way to teach, because unfortunately now that's now what the student has learned. And then when they go off and they start doing these things for real, and when they're under pressure, that's what they're going to revert back to, and that's what they're going to start thinking of. And so I've done the wrong thing. Like I haven't given that developer the right skills to be able to write code securely. So yeah, I mean, I get it.
No, and you're right. Like, changing that mindset into like, no, you can play in production. Make sure that you enable production to play on it.
Yeah,
because you will have to. We're agile. We're continuous. We're constantly releasing into it, and sometimes there's no better environment to do some things than production. So
yeah,
that's a big paradigm that it's tough to
yeah.
break out of that. So now ramping down, like closing, we already got like the message signal. Your talk for tomorrow. What is it about? I haven't seen the title. What are you talking
Yeah,
presenting?
so my talk tomorrow is about generative AI and the future of development. And
Mm.
yeah, and so basically it's a 45-minute conversation about whether or not generative AI is going to be replacing developers. And the spoiler alert, the short answer to the question is no.
Not at all.
And the longer answer to that question is no. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We've seen like throughout all my history, like when I first started writing code, I was writing code with like classic ASP, so like VB script and
ASP
things like that.
3.0. I still
Yeah,
remember that.
response right and all of that. And our tools were relatively primitive, but we were building in a lot of ways still like kind of very similar apps to what we were doing today. Only today now, like things have gotten more complex, and we've also gotten a lot of better tools. Like we've got so many frameworks that are out there to really help us be more efficient at doing development. So like, for example, we were talking about like SQL injection. Well, now I've got so many ORMs and other things that are out there that can really help me out there. And it's going to make my life as a developer that much easier. And so we've continued to just like see the growth of tools that are going to support us. And we haven't replaced developers. Like there's still a never-ending demand for developers. And on top of that, we also have tools like Microsoft's Power Apps, where power users, business users, can then like drag and drop and create applications. And really, what's happening there is they're now taking. I don't necessarily want to say someone like the lower hanging fruit, because I don't think that that's
It's not
necessarily true.
necessarily, yeah.
But they're taking some of the burden off of the developers. So now the developers can focus in on creating like the bigger things, the things that really need to be able to scale. And now my business users can do the line of business applications. And again, we still haven't seen that demand for developers start to go down. And so when we think about
Yes.
generative AI, it's yet another tool in the toolbox. And I think anybody who's used any of these tools can recognize that this is not able to replace a developer. Like I can't go to, GitHub Copilot or Code Whisperer or ChatGPT or any of them and go, hey, create this entire application for me. We're nowhere near
And
being
remove
able
the
to do
people
that.
from the
Yeah.
picture.
Exactly. So we still need developers. We're still going to need developers, and so that's basically that's my talk. Only 45 minutes. Yeah.
I love the keyword that you're using there. Like AI is not replacing or coming to do stuff for us. It's a tool,
Exactly.
and we just gonna have to learn how to use that tool to leverage it, free up some time for us to do some better, interesting things, rather than just like finding semicolons in our code or silly things like that.
Yeah.
I'm amazed of how powerful these AI tools, like some semicolons that I would like literally, true story, be 30 minutes looking for where is this. I know the line is telling me syntax error here. Oh, it's there.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, and like one of the examples that I always give is there's a web framework called Django, which is a Python web framework, and it's one of my absolute favorites. That it's for creating front ends to databases, so data driven applications. And I want to make sure that I'm clear. Like I adore Django, but that initial like getting started where I'm having to go in and define all of my models and things like that, like that's boilerplate code. That's kind of tedious because we can only abstract away so much. Like at some point you have to write some level of code. And so being able to use a tool that I can say, hey, I need a model that's going to do this and have this structure, and then poof, have that created for me. That's fantastic. So now that part is done, and now I can focus in instead on
What's
solving.
next?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are the business rules that I need to implement? What do I want to make the UI look like? Like those types of things, the things that are creative. Quite frankly, the things that are more fun. The reason that I became a developer in the first place.
Probably what we are truly looking for to do, because when you mentioned that, so many times I'm trying to do some things from scratch, where it's like if it's another tool, something solves that for you, or I mean, there's so much out there that I'm like, when you were saying that this interface, I just like, oh boy, I'm working with something right now that is like, I could just implement Django, and that's like, yeah, you're done.
Yeah.
Next level, let's work on the fun part. I love that perspective. Everyone, if you're around or you're coming, take a look at Christopher's talk tomorrow. Now, to close it up, if people want to get in touch with you, find out more, get some help, and any other details, where can people find you?
Yeah, so my handle is Geek Trainer, GeekTrainer. And so you can find me on GitHub. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not on Twitter anymore. I do still have the handle out there, but yeah. But you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me a message. I do my absolute best to try and reply to everybody there.
So check your repository, Geek Trainer. Take a look, send a message if you need any help. Come by, and we're gonna do a tour later in a moment to the GitHub booth. And Christopher, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. This was fantastic. I had a lot of fun.
Loved it. Everyone, so we still have like a parade of awesome people here. One of them, Christopher, I'm super thankful for you being here. But the show is not over yet. It's the first day of Agile and DevOps West. We will keep having some more people. I think we're, no, we still have time. Yeah. I just got the wires mixed up. Yeah. And at the end of the day, remember, there's a raffle with the passports. We hope to get our stamps in time to get on the raffle. But with that, I'll see you in a moment. We're still streaming a lot of stuff here from Agile and DevOps West. Christopher, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
With that, Leandro out, Señor Performo. See you in a bit. Adiós.